Hey everybody, good morning. It's Kim Ernstrom with the RDNA, here with Nicole Viant, and today is Fire Behavior Modeling and Reporting Day for IFTDSS. So I just want to welcome everybody. I've got 10:01 Mountain Time on my clock, so we're just going to go ahead and get started right off here. And we are recording this one. We've got the other the other three webinars have been recorded and are posted on the landing page. So you can get to those. If you haven't been able to see the previous webinars, you can go back and look at those. They're linked on the landing page, and they're also linked in the Help Center too, under webinars. So you can find those there. And let's see, for this, we're going to keep everybody on mute because that seems to work best when we have a large crowd. We've got about 34 folks right now on the line. And the best thing is if you have questions, we're going to let Nicole just sort of get going and run through her stuff. If you have questions as she's going along, go ahead and just type them in the webinar chat box, and I'll either answer them as we're going, or if we need to take a pause and visit about a question, we can do that too. So, but let's just go ahead and use the chat box for questions. And if you have any issues with hearing or seeing the screen, or if there's a delay, go ahead and put that into the chat box also, and we'll try to let things catch up. Sometimes there's a bit of delay on these things sometimes. I think that's it. So just a quick introduction. If you don't know who each of us is, I'm Kim Ernstrom. I live in Boise, and I'm one of the technical leads for IFTDSS. And Nicole is the same. She lives in Bend, Oregon, and is working on as a subject matter expert and technical specialist for IFTDSS as well. And she's our modeling expert. So she's going to be walking through the modeling piece and through some of the things that go with reports. So I think that's it. Nicole, did I miss anything?
No, I think that sounds good. I think you covered it all.
Cool. All right, well, turn it over to Nicole, and like I said, just type in your questions along the way. And we can also visit some of the questions at the end as well. So thanks. Nicole, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everybody. I'm starting a little different than the past 3 webinars, where I wanted to start with a little bit of a PowerPoint to go over the details of the fire behavior modeling within IFTDSS, just to set the stage before I start zooming around and clicking buttons. So basically, I'm going to do a quick overview of the landscape fire behavior, which is the model we have in IFTDSS, and then go into a little detail about all the different inputs you have to put in to run the model. We also have a special kind of model report that we call Auto 97th. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how we determine the 97th parameters for modeling. Then I'll talk a little bit about 2 models that are coming soon, and I'll use soon in quotes. We're hoping this year to IFTDSS to complement the landscape fire behavior model that we have right now. I'll get into the application and do a demonstration, and then I'll show you quickly an ArcMap, not in a lot of detail, the download, so you can get the information out of IFTDSS and do further analysis if you're not happy with what we have in IFTDSS, or if you just want to do a little more advanced reporting and analysis and mapping. So what we have right now is just one option for modeling fire behavior within IFTDSS, and we call it landscape fire behavior. It is based on FlameMap 5, which a lot of you are familiar with, and it's the basic fire behavior module from FlameMap 5. So what it is it's a snapshot of potential fire behavior across the landscape. Each pixel is burned independent of each other, so fire doesn't spread across the landscape with this model, but rather it just tells you what it is here and now at that one point. So a lot of people think of it as behave plus at a landscape level. So for each place, it takes into consideration the topography as well as the fuel information for that one point in the landscape and gives you predicted fire behavior under static weather. So within this model, we have the inputs. The first being the landscape, which we talked about a bit in the last few webinars. Caroline went into depth about how to create landscapes in IFTDSS last week, as well as how to edit them. So we've covered that in a past webinar. And then for the fire behavior part of it, you need information on wind, the crown fire method, you're going to use foliar moisture as well as initial surface fuel moisture. And then some of the outputs that you have within IFTDSS is we can generate maps of the model outputs as well as reports. And then we also now have the ability to download all of the outputs from our landscape fire behavior for use within a different system like ArcGIS or ArcMap. So for the fire model inputs for the behavior side, we'll talk a little bit about the different components. So there's 3 categories. The first is wind. So for wind, you need to be able to put in your wind speed, and this is your 20-foot wind speed, and it's either above the vegetation or ground. If you have vegetation, it's above vegetation. If it's bare ground, it's 20 foot above ground. We have a couple limitations and parameters on the different values. So wind speed you can enter is from 0 to 100 miles per hour. And then we also have to put in wind direction, and that's typical fire. So it's the direction the wind is blowing from, and it's degrees clockwise from north. So you need those 2 inputs to put in, and then in the background, we actually have gridded winds are always turned on within this. And gridded winds are created using the Wind Ninja application, similar to Flame Maps, so the same idea. And the idea is that landscapes, especially in diverse topography, can really influence wind speeds and directions by channeling winds through different topographic features. So it creates a more realistic wind pattern across the landscape. And a lot of research has been done showing that fire behavior prediction and accuracy does increase when these gridded wind inputs are used in modeling efforts. So that is done in the background. So you don't see that, you don't turn it on or off. So it's always on, just something to be aware of when you're using IFTDSS. So the next input is your crown fire input. We set a default value for your foliar moisture at 100%, but you can change that, so it's not locked in. And then you have a choice between crown fire methods. There's kind of 2 predominant methods that are available within kind of the whole Flame Map interface, so also within IFTDSS. And one is the old Finney method or the Scott and Reinhardt method. There's a lot of detail in our help about this, but basically at the core of it, both use the same crown fire behavior models, but there's slight differences in how they're applied. And kind of the take home is Scott and Reinhardt method results in more crown fire across the landscape if everything else is held the same. And there's been some work looking at land fire data, which is the base data we use in IFTDSS, and they recommend using the Scott and Reinhardt method when you're doing modeling, but not everyone always chooses to do that. So you have the option of either using the Finney method or the Scott and Reinhardt method as you're selecting your parameters to run the model. And then the last component that you need to enter are your initial fuel moistures. So this is the percent fuel moistures for your live and dead fuels within your landscape. So the dead fuels are the 1, 10, and 100-hour time live fuel classes. And then for live fuels, it's your herbaceous and woody. We have the ability to do one set, so those 5 fuel moistures for all the fuel models across the landscape. Or if you want to be more specific and you know certain fuel models, like a grass fuel model tends to be a little bit drier or wetter than the rest, you can actually start putting in parameters for specifics based on fuel model. If you have no idea where to start to figure out how to do your fuel moistures, there's a couple tables, and these are also in our help content online, but we have information from kind of Scott and Bergen, who created the 40 fuel model guide. So he has kind of 4 parameters based on moisture, so fully cured to fully green. So those can be kind of a starting point as you start playing around and modeling different parameters, or if you know them, you can just enter those directly into the model and use the fuel moistures that are best for your landscape. So then in IFTDSS, we also have this thing. It's unique to IFTDSS. We call it the Auto 97th, and it's we'll go over this in application 2. It's in our landscape summary report. It's basically a great starting place when you're doing a new landscape and you're trying to critique your landscape and figure out what's going on and what potential fire behavior is out there. Within this part of the application, you get a report for the landscape, which Caroline showed a little bit about last week, the report. And then you also get an automatic fire behavior run done under 97th percentile conditions. So it does the fire modeling for you, and it picks your parameters and your model input. So it's a great place to just start and see where it's at. the way we calculate 97th percentile conditions are a little different in IFTDSS than they might be in something like Fire Family Plus. So the first thing that is done is it automatically chooses the first rod station, the closest rod station, sorry, which is the one that's closest to your landscape based on the center point of your landscape. And then for every day of the fire history weather information it has, it calculates the energy release component. And then based on energy release component, first it picks your peak fire season. So that's defined as the month with the highest ERC values, and then the month prior and the month after. So it's a 3-month window that it uses to define peak fire season. And from there, it picks, in those 3 months, it determines the 97th percentile wind speed. It converts that to a 1-minute max, so your winds are a little gustier and a little faster than just the average across the data evaluated. And then it picks the wind direction based on the most frequent occurrence of that wind speed. So it's a little complicated in how it picks your wind speed and wind direction, but there is more detailed information in the help system. And then we set, for the crown fire inputs we talked about, by default, it's always 100% foliar moisture, and it's always the Scott and Reinhardt crown fire method. So that's not really linked to percentile, but that's the more extreme conditions. And then for initial fuel moistures, rather than just doing that 3-month peak fire season window, it calculates the dead and live fuel moistures for all the days where ERC is 97th percentile and above, and it gives you an average. So it's just a way, like I said, it's a good starting place for new landscapes. And it's also, it might not be the same values if you were to run Fire Family Plus outside of the system to get your 97th percentile based on just ERC because of that peak fire season window, and it's just a slightly different way of calculating 97th percentile. So a little bit about fire behavior modeling and what's coming soon. So we're hoping to have this done by the end of the calendar year, but sometimes there's bumps in the road. But we're going to be bringing in 2 different models, also still based on SLAM maps, but these are both based on the minimum travel time algorithm. So this is where fires actually spread across the landscape. So the first one we'll be bringing in is called short-term fire behavior, which if some of you work in WFDSS, this should be quite familiar to you. Basically, it's really used for short-term views of fire behavior across the landscape. So it's typically used for 1 to 3 days, and you either put in a single point or a line ignition and see how fire moves over that duration. One thing to know is with these models, it's constant weather, so you don't have the diurnal fluctuations like you might have with something like Farsight. But it's still a good approximation of fire spread in the short term. So it's used often for kind of that worst case scenario, so 1 to 3 day period. In addition to the basic outputs that you get out of SLAM map, you also get flow paths and arrival time. So these can be really helpful when you're working with fuel treatment planning to think about where maybe you could put treatments to slow the spread of fire. And the second one that we're adding is landscape burn probability. This is, again, also the minimum travel time from SLAM map. For this, we use thousands or tens of thousands of random ignitions across a landscape, and we burn them each for a single burn period. Again, it's constant weather and wind, and with this you get burn probability, which is the representation of the likelihood of fire, and then conditional intensity. This is most used with wildfire risk assessments. So once we have landscape burn probability within IFTDSS, we will be doing quantitative risk assessments with this model as well. So those are coming later this year, hopefully by the end of the calendar year, like I said. So stay tuned for more modeling options within IFTDSS. So with that, I am going to go into the application. So I am logged into IFTDSS here, and I'm going to start, we talked a little bit about that auto 97th option. I'm going to show you where that is within the application first, and we'll go over some of the outputs since there aren't many inputs for it. So within the cycle, that is within the landscape evaluation, which is also the default spot you get put in when you log into IFTDSS and go to your cycle. And then it's the landscape summary card. So within the landscape summary card, you have a couple options. You can either bring a landscape to the form with one you have, or if you don't have one yet, you can use this thumbnail option to create a landscape within the map. I'm going to actually use one I already created for the example instead of creating one, but just wanted to show you have the option to do that here. So with my landscapes, I'm going to bring in one I created that is just west of where I live here in Bend. So it's kind of the West Bend wildland urban interface. I'm curious to see how fire behavior might be in and around where I live if there is a large fire. Within this, you can also bring in an area of interest. So this is important when it comes to creating your reports and doing summaries. So for me, I'm also Forest Service, and I might be interested not only in how fire behavior looks near my home, but let's see how it is within the forest. So I'm going to bring in a mask, which you can either create in Map Studio using hand drawing and digitizing, or you can upload a shapefile. So for this, I uploaded a shapefile earlier, and it's the ranger districts for the Deschutes National Forest. So with this, I'm going to request my report. And since I've run it, it's already run and there, which makes it quite easy. But these reports take, 5 minutes to a half hour, depending on how large your landscape is. So within the report, I'll point out the first thing. At the header, we have all the model parameters. So this is telling me for my landscape, which is just west of Bend. The RAWS station it shows is called Temelo Ridge. The data period that it's using to find the weather observations is August of 2002 to October of 2016. So those are the years that we have the data in the background. It also gives me information about the station elevation, which is 4,000 feet. The aspect is 0, so flat slope, as well as the latitude and longitude of the station. On the left-hand side, it tells me the name of the run, so that's in the background. When I actually did the run, the wind speed is 14, so that's the 20-foot wind speed was 14 miles per hour, and the wind direction was 0, so from the north. The crown fire method was Scott and Reinhardt. The foliar moisture was 100%, so those are going to always be set, the crown fire method and foliar moisture in this part of the application. And then it gives me my fuel moisture. So for 97th percentile, it's telling me my 1 hour and 10 hour fuel moistures are 3%, my 100, 6%, and then my live herbaceous is 105, and my live woody is 125. So those are the conditions based on our auto 97th for the landscape that I have. Then within the report, we've got the first part is all the landscape characteristics. So the first one up we have is fuel model. So this is a map of my landscape as a square, and then the purple crosshatch would be kind of the extent of those the ranger districts on the Deschutes National Forest. So this is the Bend Fort Rock Ranger District around my landscape. So for this example, my summary is just going to be within that purple hashed area and not the area outside. If I did not use that area of interest, it would be a report based on the whole landscape. With reports, you have the option to download the whole report by hitting that button as a PDF. Oh, sorry, this is for the JPEG for the single map. If you wanted to download the whole report, sorry, it's the arrow at the top, and this generates a PDF of your entire report, all the options. So you can also download individual components. Yeah.
Hey, just really quick, and just because I want to make sure I'm clarifying this right, there was a question about the Auto 97s and the length of the fire, the number of years being used to calculate that from the RAWS station. And if I remember, I think it uses the entire record, right? And for, like in this case, and the one you're showing, 2002 to 2016. Is that it?
Yeah, and it varies a little bit based on your RAWS station because not all of them have the same length of data with them. So for this one, because it's showing me August to October, I believe the peak fire season then month would be September. So it's using the month prior, so August, September, and October. So those are the 3 months it's using.
And I'm just going to add in the future, I think it depends if we end up adding in some of the gridded weather data rather than using RAWS, then it'll take out some of the issues with RAWS stations and their quality and things like that. So we're not probably going to, people have asked us, can you choose your RAW station to do these analyses? And the short answer is, well, technically you could, but we're not going to enable that in IFTDSS because our hope is to bring in the gridded weather in the future, which will eliminate some of the issues. So hopefully that doesn't confuse things too much, but just wanted to point that out. Sorry to interrupt, Nicole.
That's a good point. Oh, no problem. And it's also, like I said early on, this is just a good starting point. Because personally, from living here for 97th percentile, which is kind of that problem fire weather day, I'd imagine the live fuel moistures would be a bit lower than this. But that's just from kind of experience in living here. But it's a good place to start and understand and get a feel for your landscape and fire behavior. So continuing down the report, it's kind of the same format for all of the landscape characteristics as well as the model characteristics. But after we have the map, there's always a bar chart, and it breaks down the different percentages for this example, it's the fuel models present within your landscape. You can hover over if you want to know the exact percentages. It's kind of a handy, just visual way to look at it. You can also download this component as these 3 different file types for if you want to embed them in a report. You don't have to do a screenshot. You can actually download it and have a slightly better quality image. As we keep moving down, the next one we have is the pie chart. So it's the same information as the chart above, just a different way of displaying it for different people that, you know, just like to see things in different ways. And again, you can download it as different image types. And then we have a table output also. So same information again, just another way of displaying it. For this, you can either copy and paste the table into, you know, Excel. You could also download it as a CSV or Excel, which are a similar format, a PDF, or you can just send it to the printer to print this. There's also one thing to note is it only shows the top 10 at any given time. So if you can see it's only showing 1 to 10 of 25, so that's not my entire table. I just need to click the button to expand it to be able to see everything. In this table, it gives you the pixel count, so that's the number of those cells within the landscape. Converts that to acres, and then it also gives you percent. So it's 3 different ways of seeing the data. This is true for all of our other values too. We have canopy cover. There's set bins for these data across all of them, so those are always static at 10% classes. We also have canopy base height and canopy pulse density, elevation, you know, slope, etc. So all the 8 components that are within the landscape are there. And then for model characteristics, we show crown fire. So that's the crown fire activity. So that's the surface fire, passive crown fire, active crown fire, or no fire. We also have flame length, and flame length is broken into different classes. So we have 0 to 1 foot, 1 to 4, 11 to 25, and greater than 25 feet. We also show the heat per unit area in set bins, as well as fire line intensity and rate of spread. So one thing to note is with our most recent release, which was at the end of February, we listened to you guys and we've changed the report output to be in English units. So it's in feet now instead of meters for the fire behavior outputs and for most of the landscape characteristics. Some we kept at metric because that's the base data from land fire. So that's kind of a quick look at some of the reports for the Auto 97th. If we go back, I'm also going to show you where once we did this run, where it ends up. So all of our runs end up in one of 2 places. My workspace is kind of like a file system within your computer. We have different folders. So based on where you decide to create your landscape, everything will fall into that folder. I created one today called Webinar. So in here, I've got my West Bend landscape. I also have my model run, so my model output for the Auto 97th. So we can also view this on the map, which I'll show you right now. So when I choose to show it on the map, it automatically loads it and zooms into the location. So Bend is kind of on the east side of the extent. We can also see the table contents. So right now flame length is showing, and it's the same classes as we had in the report. So you can turn on and off the different layers to see different options in mapping. So crown fire activity, it looks like a lot of surface fire around here, which is the bright yellow with that auto 97th condition. You can also, if you want to change the transparency, you can make it bold and light so you can see things through each other, so you can play with the transparency a little bit with it. We've been asked in the past, currently we don't have a better way of downloading this image other than just a screenshot. So that might be something we add later as a way to create a JPEG out of the mapped output. I'm going to go back to my workspace now and my folder again and show you for that same area that I just showed you on the map. You also have the option to download it. So this is the only place within the application that you can download those outputs. And I'll show you what those look like in ArcMap towards the end of the webinar here. You can also, let's say, you wanted to create a report from these outputs at this point. You can do run model reports within here. We also have the option to not do the auto 97th. So I'm going to go back to the cycle again, kind of the hub of IFTDSS, and I'm going to show you landscape fire behavior. So this is another option we have. So this is no longer the automatic version. Here you actually get to input your model parameters. Let's say you weren't happy with the auto 97th, or you have different parameters you know. For example, you want to use it for writing a burn plan, and that's typically not your 97th percentile conditions. You can go to landscape fire behavior to calculate fire behavior. I just want to point out here, this card, so it was landscape evaluation to landscape fire behavior, gets you to the same place as if you click playground on the navigation bar. So there's just a couple ways to get there. So this is the playground. And in my modeling playground, it's another place where all of our fire model runs end up. So they end up in your workspace where I showed you, kind of filed by your folder, or you can end up in my playground, and these just get listed in the order you run them. So as you can see, I've been busy running lots of fire model outputs over time. And here, you start by selecting your model, and at this point, it's just that landscape fire behavior, but soon it'll be short-term as well as the burn probability options. And then you go to run landscape fire behavior. So here you'd do your run name. I'm going to type in West Bend 2 just as a new run name. I'm going to select my landscape. Since I already had one run, I'll grab that. You could also create it here using a thumbnail like I showed earlier, or you can start in Map Studio to create your landscape. This can be an original landscape. It can be an edited landscape. So you're not limited in the type of landscape you bring in here. Gives you a little information on your landscape details when you do it. And now I get to actually put in parameters. So I'm going to notch it up a little bit. We'll say it's a really windy day in Bend. We'll say it's 40 miles per hour. We're going to say it's out of 220 degrees from north. I'm going to leave the crown fire method at Scott and Reinhardt and the foliar moisture at 100 because that seems appropriate for the area. I'm going to go a little drier. So I'm going to do kind of the dry scenario from Scott and Reinhardt, or Scott and Bergen, which is the 3, 4, 5, 30, and 60. So that was the 1, 10, 100 hour plus the herbaceous and woody fuel moistures. Those are fully cured for the live fuel moistures, and a very dry scenario for the initial fuel moistures. I also know there's a lot of grass fuel model out here, and I'm going to make it a little moister. So we'll say it's not totally cured within the grass area because it's somewhat shaded by vegetation. So I'm going to say, we're just going to tweak it up a little bit. So we'll say 45% and 75%. So I can do that for just that one fuel model across the landscape. So I'm going to save this and run it. And it tells me here in the status what it's doing. So at this point, it is still running. And I can hit refresh a lot until it's done running. We'll see if it's done. So for lacking waiting, we'll go to what I ran earlier. So with the West Bend, you can also view your model inputs in case you forget what they are. so you can see what they are again and expand them. You can also request a report. So at this point, it didn't create the report like we did earlier, so I will request a report, and it'll run your report. And for this, it's the same parameters and the same setup as I showed a moment ago with the Auto 97s, except this time it's just model characteristics. So you don't have the landscape summary with this report. You can also view it on your map from here, just like we showed earlier. And again, it zooms in and we can open up the layer list and look at our categories and our table of contents to know what we're looking at on the map. And it also ends up, after you do the run, in your folder. So my run is finally completed now that West Bend 2 I just ran. So I can do all the same things. I can request a report from here. I can view it on the map, or I can download my output. So that's the area. So again, that's within the cycle and landscape fire behaviors, how we get there, or just from the playground tab on the navigation bar. So this is where you would come if you want to start playing around with just different model inputs. So if you're not quite sure what you want to do and you want to just test out different scenarios, or if you know what you want to do and you just want to run your parameters instead of the Auto 97s, you would come here to run the different parameters you want for wind speed and crown method and fuel moistures. So this is where we come to do that. You can do a report, request a report. The one unfortunate thing right now with Playground is you can't do your report just on an area of interest, like I showed with the Auto 97. So at this point, we don't have that capability here. There is one more place within the application where you can also do fire behavior, and it's in going back to cycle, and this time I'm going to go to strategic planning. And here it's develop treatment alternatives, and we will have a webinar, our next one coming up 2 weeks from today. It's going to dive deep into this part of the application, so I'm not going to go too deep into how this works, but I'll show you what it is. So I'm going to select a new landscape. I'm going to do split window so you guys can see where it is on the map. And I'm going to go to Idaho this time, to the Salmon River area within Idaho as it's loading. So this is my landscape extent within Salmon River. I'm going to turn off my mask, the big blob. And so this is my landscape. And within here, I used a couple fire perimeters, old ones to do some edits. So kind of these very broken up blobs were old wildfire perimeters within my landscape. So I use those to edit my landscape and create a new landscape with edited ones. I can come in to my input. So very similar to the screen you just saw. I can input my weather parameters. So for this, I did a 25 mile per hour wind out of 220. Again, the Scott and Reinhardt in that very dry scenario. It's kind of my default starting point with landscape. I can then go to run the model. So at this point, you can rename the run if you want and run it. And then here you can actually compare alternatives. So you can compare these two landscapes. So I'm doing comparison and I'm looking at just the basic landscape, and then again the landscape where I did some updates and edits to the fire perimeter areas. And I can compare this on a map, and I can also compare in summary reports. So both are running right now, but first I'll open up the summary reports. They have a little different feel than the other reports I showed you because they're a comparison report. So we'll look first at the model outputs. Again, it has the header with the model parameters, but because it wasn't the Auto 97 and its parameters I put in it, obviously does not have information about a rod station. So that part of the report is lacking, but it does have the parameters I put in to run the model. And then there is no map at this point, so it's just the bar charts, pie charts, and tables for each output. But here it shows you side-by-side comparisons of your two landscapes. So for me, Salmon River is my original landscape, which is in green, and then where I updated everything for the fires is in blue. So it shows me post-fire, I have more flame length, lower flame length. So in the 1 to 4 category, I have a higher percentage of my landscape after those wildfires happen than had the wildfires not happened at all. It's not a big difference. It's about 3%, but you can start to see how edits you make on your landscape change fire behavior outputs across the whole area. So we also have the table, same, you can download out the values to put in Excel and graph in different ways. So for example, if you don't like blue and green, you'd have to do that in Excel. Right now, we're locked into the colors that are here. We also have the side-by-side pie chart. You can download the individual pie chart to put into external reports. And then we also have a percent difference. So it just shows you how it's changed. And this is where the order you figure landscapes, which will be gone into in great detail next week, dictates one minus the other. So for this one, it's number 2 is the one you're always comparing against. So landscape 1 has 3% more area and a lower flame length. So it's showing that the treatments actually reduce potential fire behavior because you have more area and lower flame lengths and less and higher flame lengths with that edited landscape being the same in river fires. Back here, we also can look at our edits on the map. So we can look at landscape change as well as model output change. So we'll look at the model output, and I'm going to turn off my maps because they're kind of hard sometimes, but you can see where we have changes across the landscape and predicted fire behavior. So anywhere that is in a warmer color, so the blue tones is where flame length was reduced across the landscape due to those treatments, and anywhere that is a red or warmer means we actually had an increase in flame length. And we can do this for all the different parameters that we map. We also have crown fire activity, which is kind of light, so I'm going to change the transparency if it's just a lighter color. So anywhere it's gray in this, there was no change to crown fire type. Green colors are a decrease and red colors are an increase in the potential fire behavior there. So that's kind of a quick zoom around the things within the IFTDSS application, and I wanted to end this in a couple minutes so we have some time for questions if they're there. But I wanted to show the download outputs in ArcMap as one last thing. So again, where you would get those downloads is you would go to My Workspace. You could find your model output, and if you want to kind of just see model outputs, if this is a little busy, you can use the display option up here and click your model output, and then highlight one and download. So when you download this, you can change the file name if you want. I usually leave it as the default, so it comes down as a zip file. You can download it. To know where it's going on your download, you have to look at your internet browser options to figure it out. Luckily in Chrome, they kind of just show up on the bar. So I show it in my folder. There's my download. It's a zip file. I can then move it to wherever I need to use it. Once I get to that folder, I would unzip it, and then I would load it into ArcMap. So one thing is within the application, we only had those few metrics that you could look at, but there's a lot more that's modeled within the landscape fire behavior. And all 18 parameters that come out of the model are available with the download. So that includes your fuel moistures, which are 110, 100, and 1,000 hour. These, because we do not have fuel moisture conditioning on, are just the static values that you put in the model. We also have the ones that you've seen, which are crown fire activity. Crown fraction burned is a range from 0 to 1, 1 being active crown fire, 0 being surface fire or no fire. And how crown fraction burned is calculated depends on which method you use, if it was the Finney or the Scott and Reinhardt. We also have fire line intensity, flame length, heat per unit area. So those were all within the IFTDSS application. Also information about the horizontal movement rate, spotting direction, distance. Information, since we do have the gridded winds on, we've got mid-flame wind speed as well as wind direction wind speed. So those come from the gridded information. Solar radiation, which is used in fuel moisture conditioning, is a 0 since we don't have that turned on across the landscape. So you get a lot more information from the download geotiff. One thing to note is these are all continuous data. So we don't have those categories and classes like we had in the reports within IFTDSS. They're also in metric units. So for example, flame length that we're looking at right now is meters. So it's 0 to 58 meters is the spread of this map. The only exception to that within these outputs is the mid-flame and wind speed. Outputs are miles per hour. Everything else is metric, so it's a little different than within the application. Just a warning if you download it and things don't match up, if you make those classes match the ones you see within IFTDSS. So yeah, I know that was kind of a quick overview of fire modeling within IFTDSS, as well as where you can do it within the application. A little look at the reports, and then look at the outputs in ArcMap. So with that, I'd like to see if there's any questions from folks.
Well, thanks, Nicole. That was very cool. So we've got a number of questions. I've answered I think most of them. Let's see, there's a few that just came in here just at the very tail end. The first one, though, the first question that was asked was, can we distribute your PowerPoint? I think it's great, and yes. So to me, the answer is yes. We can either email it out to the folks who attended the webinars, and we can also post it to the website and to the help section as well. So I think Nicole did a great job laying this out and kind of breaking it down. So Nicole, if you're good with that,
yeah,
sounds
I'll
like
get that.
a good thing to share. Yeah. Let's see, a few other questions. I think I mentioned the one about the fire analysis for the Auto 97th and how it uses the RAS stations to choose those months and then how many years it uses in the record. So that's always found in the header of the report. You can see which years it picked and then which months that it picked. So you can always find that there. Another question was, can we look at the gridded winds that are generated from Wind Ninja as a layer? And right now, no, you can't. We're not able to expose those in IFTDSS, but Nicole's showing you right now in, I don't think, do we get those? Do we get the little arrows and everything, Nicole, from Wind Ninja in ArcMap when you download it? Okay.
It creates, you get the grid, so you can get your wind speed and your wind direction, and that's kind of the two that are shown right now. It's just the wind speed, and again, this is miles per hour, so this is the 20 foot above, and you also have your mid-flame wind speed if that's something of interest too.
Gotcha. Yep. So in the future, we'd love to be able to expose that layer. I know I use it when I go out in the summertime on fires. Everyone likes to see the little Wind Ninja grid with the arrows and the colors that show wind speed and direction in that format. And perhaps we can do that down the road. Let's see. Next question was, how do you run a report on a range of values? So the example is writing a burn prescription, for example. So in this case, we use the developed treatment alternatives to look at two different landscapes that have been edited, and then you're comparing fire behavior outputs based on the edit in the landscape, and you're not varying the weather. Certainly for writing a burn prescription, what you want to do, obviously, is compare weather. So rather than comparing edited landscapes, you want to compare weather scenarios. So right now, we don't have it built in where you can pick a tab that says, you know, weather scenario number 1, weather scenario number 2, and then run a comparison within sort of this type of workflow that Nicole's showing right now. You could do it individually in the playground, where you would run one model with your one weather scenario, get your outputs, get your report. Then you'd go back in and run a second and maybe a third, and sort of do it one by one in the playground. Then what you would have to do is download those results from the report in Excel format and sort of make your own charts and graphs, if you will. So that's not ideal. That's not how we want things to work in the future. So it is on our list to come up with a compare weather type of workflow where you can run through the tabs and then do the comparisons that way. So right now it's sort of a step-by-step thing. You can do it within the treatment alternatives workflow. You sort of have to trick the system in a way where you would take you take a regular landscape and put in your weather inputs, then build a second landscape with an edit that didn't really change anything. So perhaps multiplying the canopy cover by 1, which doesn't change anything on the map. Then you would enter a second set of weather of parameters, and then you could do the comparison. Essentially, you're getting two things that are just different weather. So it's a little bit of a trick. We've actually got a tutorial written for that, sort of a workaround, if you will, and I'm planning on getting that finalized and uploaded so people can sort of work through that if they want to compare a couple weather scenarios in sort of a workaround way. Again, not ideal. We do want to make that weather comparison for the future. So let's see, another person has asked, can a person go back in time and do fire behavior modeling? For example, let's see, whoops, here, I'm trying to get my, can you go back 10 years and then model that? So right now we don't have a way to go pull particular weather by date or by year at this point. Again, that's something that would be kind of on the list for the future, if you will. It's a great suggestion though, and I could see where people would want to trying to calibrate things or look at you know, a historical fire and then game that out for a future scenario for planning sake. So great suggestion there. Let's see, can the base layer map in reports be changed? Another great question. No, it's a default base layer right now. We hope in the future to be able to make those reports a little more flexible, but right now we're stuck with the thumbnail that it gives us. Of course, you can always do your own in the Map Studio and change the base layer and then kind of screen capture your own, you know, your own map, if you will, and use that along with some of the outputs from the reports, you know, the charts and graphs, but you'll just sort of create your own map and then just do a snag it or something out of the Map Studio. Let's see, a few more questions here. Make sure I get to all of these. I'll type in the answers to these as well, and then they'll be on the record for the webinar, and folks can go back and can take a peek if you have that question in the future. Let's see, how to upload LCP files that have been updated by regional fire planners? So for example, I think the question is, can I upload my own LCP? I hate to say it, but no, not right now. That is something people ask us though. And I think we would like to be able to do that where people can use local data that they've manipulated or that they've sort of calibrated to their own, you know, real world landscape. And then they want to use that rather than having to edit land fire data. And we totally get that's an important thing to be able to do. So I think we'd like to hear a little bit more from people about the types of editing and types of landscape files that maybe they have on their desktops or on their local hard drives that they would like to use. Because as data is uploaded into IFTDSS, it can get pretty complicated to store a lot of this stuff. So there is a limit to how complex the data can be. So I think we'd like to hear a little bit more about types of raster type data that folks would like to upload. That would help us learn a little bit more about what the capabilities of the system are down the road. So that's a great question, and keep feeding us those questions. You can hit us up by email if you have questions like that. Also, the user forums within the help system are another great place for folks to load questions like this in, because then we can answer them and everybody can see the answers. So using the question and answer forum or the ideas exchange, and some of the, I'm going to stick actually a lot of these questions you all have entered in here into this, because these are all really good questions and sort of frequently asked questions that we get. So I'll be loading your questions and answers into this system so other people can see them. Let's see, I've got about 5 or 6 more questions in here. Can a model runs parameters that were used to create be downloaded along with the spatial data? That's a good question, Nicole. We have the model. Isn't there is a model run input file? I don't think that can be downloaded at this point, though.
Currently, no, it's not available, but that is a great suggestion. I think it would be something that would be fairly straightforward to turn into a text file that could come along with it. So that's a great one. We'll pass that on to the programmers and see if that's possible.
Yeah. It should be an easy one because we're already capturing that as an input file. So it's just a matter of making it available for download. So we'll definitely look into that and see if that's something easy. We usually categorize these enhancements, if you will, as sort of easy or hard. And the things that are easy, we can sort of put on the list and say, oh yeah, that's a real quick fix. That won't take us very long to incorporate that. So that's part of how we prioritize some of these changes as well. So that's a good one. Any thoughts on integrating Fire Family Plus? We have actually, and but right now I don't think we have the bandwidth to do that as we move into working on some of the quantitative risk assessment work that Nicole mentioned at the beginning with the burn probability and adding some of the other models. So that's going to be our focus as we sort of move into the summertime. But it's definitely something folks have asked, and we'll be in conversations with the folks from the lab and Matt Jolly and the rest of the crew that works on Fire Family Plus to see if there's potential for that in the future. Let's see, we've got another question about NIFPORs. Are NIFPORs fields treatment polygons accessible for editing landscapes? It's a great one. And actually, the answer right now is yes. And so right now they're set up, and I'm letting Nicole pull up the map studio here to show you the data layers and where those actually exist. And we're working on, there's always questions about NIFPORs data and points and polygons and things like that and what's available. So we're using those for the fields treatment effectiveness monitoring database, but it's also in our layer list here. So right now we've got a static set of treatment polygons. So if you click on the identify tool, you can see those. And then in the future, that'll be a live data set coming from a NIFPORs feed nightly. So currently it's static, but it will be a nightly pull from NIFPORs and from FACS for those folks that use FACS for the Forest Service. When will land fire be updated for California? That's a great question, and we can pass that one along to Henry. If those of you, I don't know if all of you have been tracking budget issues, but land fire definitely had a giant budget cut. So they are struggling with keeping on schedule for some of the work they had planned. So that's a great question for Henry. Henry's our project manager for IFTDSS as well as land fire. I'll pass that question along to Henry and see if we can't kick out an answer for you, Bert, on that one. But I do know their budget has been greatly affected this past year. Let's see, another one. In addition to compare weather, can you cheat to aggregate RAS stations? Another good question. And you'd have to do that manually. So you'd have to go into those RAS data yourself and then sort of work through that sort of manually in order to incorporate any of those, any of those parameters that you're analyzing for 97th percentile or whatever percentile you're looking for. So the answer to that one is you can't cheat the RAS right now. Like I said, we're hoping to incorporate the gridded weather in the future, which will hopefully solve some of this RAS issue. And then in that case, any point you pick on the map, it would be able to pull that weather for that point, and it has historical data back 20 years, I believe. So it'll be a much better way to do weather, gaming weather scenarios and such for fire behavior modeling. So we'll keep you posted on how that's tracking as far as incorporating that. Let's see, how will IFTDSS work with the research community to update underlying fire effects models? Good question. We've been in a lot of conversations with folks, both from, for example, for fuel calc, FOFOM, FFI, some of those fire effects types of things. We've been talking with Duncan Lutz up at the fire lab, the smoke folks. We've had a lot of conversations. So it really comes down to time and money, really. And it's definitely something, it's on the list. And we're hoping that in time, we'll have the bandwidth and the funding to do that. So we're a bit funding restricted at the moment, but it's definitely something a lot of folks ask about. And again, a lot of this stuff, if we need to hear from you, if it's something that will help you do your job better, we want to know that, because that helps us push our case up the chain here and up through the budget folks in order to make some of these things happen. Again, if you can toss any of these ideas into our ideas exchange, we're sharing this with leadership and letting them know what the field wants, because that really should be driving how IFTDSS is developed. And then the last question that's on here, and then we'll wrap it up for the day, is there a potential to see three-dimensional 3D changes between different alternatives like VDTT? And It could be. It's something we could add in the future if that's something that would help folks. We don't obviously have the capability right now, but again, if that's something that would help you, help you do your work and do better planning and such, then that's something we could investigate. So I think that's, hopefully, I know I ran through those really fast. We're about 5 minutes to the hour, and it certainly let us know if folks have other questions, if there's other, functionality that you're looking for that, like I said, would help you do your job. Please let us know, because that's an important piece that we want to hear from the field. We've had great attendance on these webinars. I think we had 45, 47 folks today. We had about 70 folks the past 3 webinars. We're going to have another one in a couple weeks. And if there's other types of training or other types of this type of demo kind of work that would help you all, we're always happy to try to fit those in for folks. So if we can do it on an interagency basis, it's always better. We get more people involved. But please just hit us up. IFTDSS is sort of, taking on this sort of grassrootsy kind of thing, which is great. And the more we can share this with the field and the more we get your input, the better we can make things. So if you like what you see, tell your friends, tell your leadership, and that'll help keep things going. So Nicole, I'll let you wrap it up with anything else you want to add, and we hope to see folks in the future.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for tuning in and listening, and great questions, good things to think about. And if you do have the time to put things in the ideas exchange, it's always great for it not to just come from the core team. So like Kim says, we share that with leadership, and we also share that with our programmers. So it's really helpful for us if you can take the time to do that once you get in and start playing and thinking about it more.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Again, this will be recorded. It'll be available on the landing page for IFTDSS and also in the help. Let your friends know if they weren't able to make it. They're welcome to watch the recording. And I'm going to go through and answer the rest of these questions, and type them in so we have a record of them, and try to get them into our user forum as well. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day and have a great weekend. It's spring. Enjoy.